rings of power are flashing on the sea. The magic is angry and Sauron is obscene. Gilgalad is making fences of Elven in the dark. The orcs are lighting bonfires and spray painting the park. Rings of power, yeah! Rings of power, oh! Rings of power, sweet! Rings of power, no! Rings of power.
All right, I am making this review from a hotel room. I'm traveling. I traveled to Washington, D.C. To play Black Ops 6 before the beta this weekend, and the new Warzone map and a bunch of stuff like that. And I've been, having fun in Washington, D.C., the capital, doing some sightseeing, going to museums, all that, and watching the Rings of Power. But I will say that my setup here in my hotel room is not ideal. I don't have my normal, recording equipment, lighting, all that stuff. So, amateur hour over here. Sort of like the Rings of Power. So, last night I saw like a bunch of reviews come in to Rotten Tomatoes. A bunch of critics had screeners. I did not. Some had the screeners for the first 3 episodes. Some had screeners for the whole 8-episode season. I had no screeners. So last night I wrote a piece just talking about how I don't buy it. I don't buy the reviews are crazy good for season 2, even better than season 1, right? And actually after I posted this piece, at the time it was 85%. The last time I checked, it was 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Really, really good scores for this season. I've now watched. I spent all evening watching the first 3 episodes of this shit show that is The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. It is not. I shouldn't even say those things in this. It's not Lord of the Rings. It's The Rings of Power. It is a fanfic. It is a badly made fanfic of Lord of the Rings. So I should stop saying those things in conjunction, other than to point out how they are not alike. Honestly, I'm enjoying season 2 less than season 1. Season 1 had some, at least it had a little bit of oomph to it. It had something pushing the narrative forward. Season 2 just feels like a bunch of disjointed storylines taking place at the same time. But it's so messy. There's this whole backstory about Sauron / Halbrand / Anatar. And I'm just trying to figure out how it actually fits in with season 1. Because it's first we see him get betrayed by Adar, recasted Adar. And he's killed by the orcs, and he turns into a venom goo, a black goo. And then he becomes Halbrand, and then he goes off on the boat where the sea monster gets him, and he meets up with Galadriel. But then he's back in the Southlands, aka Mordor, and he's captured by Adar, and Adar doesn't know who he is, but he escapes, and then he goes back to Eregion, and goes back to Celebrimbor to then reveals himself as Anatar. It's so confusing. I just don't know how the timelines work, because at the end of season 1, he had revealed himself to Galadriel and then left to go back to Mordor. And I'm just did he go back to Mordor and pretend to be Halbrand to Adar? What happened? It's very jarring. The whole timeline is very jarring, and I just don't understand it. And that's just. So this is one storyline, right? He eventually comes back to Celebrimbor and tells him he's Anatar, and he's there to help him make great stuff so he can be like his grandpappy Feanor. And I just, oh God, the elves in this show are so bad. The one good thing about this season is there's less Galadriel, but the stuff that does have Galadriel is so obnoxious because, okay, they crafted the 3 rings at the end of season 1, 3 elven rings, out of order. They were supposed to be the last rings that Celebrimbor makes, not the first rings, and they were made in secret without Sauron knowing, just like he creates the One Ring without the elves knowing. But anyways, Elrond, is it Elrond or Elrond? Anyways, he starts to like tell everybody that these rings are corrupt. They were made by Sauron, and he runs and absconds off with them, and then we get like fugitive. It's like the fugitive. I really just couldn't help but think about the fugitive when like Gil-galad and Galadriel are like, stop that elf, and he jumps off the waterfall and shit. Like he goes to what's his face? The shipwright, Círdan. Anyways. Oh, all these stories, like, see, this is the problem. Like, I'm trying to summarize what happens in the first 3 episodes, but it's just all over the place. There's all these different storylines. You've got all this stuff with Elrond running away with the 3 rings, but then they get the rings and they put them on, and, like, everything is fixed immediately. Like, oh, they got like, the Elven stuff that was going bad, now it's all fixed now. It was so great, because they just needed to make a mithril alloy. Then you have the stranger, a.k.a. Baby Gandalf, a.k.a. not Gandalf, a.k.a. whatever, and Nori, and they're like going to Rune out in the desert, and they get lost, and then Poppy, Nori's friend, just like shows up. Oh, she found them, and she brought food and maps, and like these guys, they're so incompetent, but then just Poppy shows up, and everything's fine, but they're being hunted down by like these masked characters that look like straight out of Star Wars or something. That's another plot line that just kind of goes nowhere, but we follow it. And all these different plot lines, all these different arcs, they feel so disjointed from one another. Like we're not really following a story, we're just following a collection of things that happen to different characters. Right? A story is, there's a difference, right? A story is about something, right? All these characters are in it for a reason. There is a purpose to a story. We are traveling through this narrative in order to glean some meaning, right? But in Rings of Power Season 2, it's just all these different characters doing stuff. It's not really a story. So you've got the Rune arc, which just sort of like goes, and then you've got Isildur off in the Southlands, Mordor, and he meets a new chica, and they're like, hey, let's hang out and let's make some babies together, and then you've got they get saved by Erendir, who then is just like burning the corpse of Bronwyn, who is dead now, out of the blue. They just killed her off. It's because the actress quit. Instead of recasting her like they did with Adar, they just have her die of like an old orc, like an orc arrow or something. And so they keep Theo around so that he can be a petulant little bitch. And I actually like Erendir. Like, as far as the characters go, like, I like him. But in this season, I like him less. Like, I feel like I like everybody less this season. A lot of reviewers are like, oh, this season's so much better than season 1. But honestly, I think I like season 1 more, which is really bad. You've got Durin and Durin. There's only supposed to be one Durin at a time, but whatever. This show gives us old Durin and young Durin, and they fight a lot still. That's kind of their thing. A lot of arguing with the dwarves, but they're also going to get rings made by Celebrimbor and Anatar. That heroic duo of smithies, smithing things for everybody, not just the elves, but the dwarves too, and the men and the women. Also the women, There's more. See, this is the problem. Because there's not a coherent story, and because they don't do a lot to like make us care about the characters. Like in a good series, all this stuff, like everything here is like big, like oh these big things matter, and we're supposed to care about them because the Elven society is gonna die, and they need the rings and da 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 da. But in a good show, in a show where they really make you care about what's happening, it's because they make you care about the characters, which means you need to take a little bit of time to like develop the characters and make them funny and make them, tragic, or make them whatever. Give us something to latch onto with these characters, but they just don't do that here. Oh, that's the other storyline that I keep forgetting. Numenor. Over in Numenor, blind Queen What's-Her-Face has lost the faith of the people, and Alpharazon is capitalizing on that. And there's all the scheming, and it's very Game of Thronesy, right? Like, and then he, the people are like, she's a liar, and he's like, I am your king, and then an eagle shows up, and they're like, the eagle says he's our king, and then the eagle flies away, and she gets overthrown. What is happening in this show? It's like, and why do we care? Most of that is just Elendil, Isildur's daddy, walking around like, what's going on here? What's going on? I'm Elendil, and I look confused. And I feel it, Elendil, man. I fucking feel it, man. I am also confused. There is too much happening in Rings of Power. There's too much happening, and none of it really matters. That is the real problem here. None of it really matters. I don't care what happens in Numenor. I don't care if the elves get the rings. I don't care. Partly this is the prequel problem, right? Like prequels, we know what's going to happen. Sauron going to get a bunch of power, and then Isildur going to cut his finger off and get the ring, and then the ring is going to fall in a river, and then, Gollum and Bilbo and blah, 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 blah. We know what's going to happen. So that's already, it's hard to care, right? But a good prequel, like Better Call Saul, it gives us emotional weight. It gives us a story that we don't fully understand because we're not just trying to figure out what happens to bring us to the story we already know. In a good prequel, we're learning a new story altogether that casts a new light on what we already know, or casts a new shadow, right? A new light, we're getting into like Rings of Power level dialogue if we further pursue whether we're casting light or shadow. What? Why does a stone sink, but a boat doesn't sink? Maybe because a boat is engineered not to sink. But really, like, a good prequel tells a story that we didn't know already, and further embellishes or enriches the story we did know. But Rings of Power just condenses all these timelines, rushes everything. It gives this the trappings of epic fantasy, but it all feels very generic. And season 2 is just more of the same in a lot of ways. It's just more generic epic fantasy with lots of sort of grandiose dialogue, but not a lot of substance and not a lot of like character examination, not a lot of the stuff that really could make this a compelling and interesting show. And that's where I'm at with it. That's where I'm at. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. Okay. So let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry. I know probably this sound is terrible and whatever, but I am on the road. So bear with me. It's not easy being green. I've been in DC. I went to the, just like as a little PS postscript here, I went to the Museum of National History today and saw some really cool stuff, like the original costumes for C-3PO and R2-D2 from The Return of the Jedi, and a bunch of cool stuff like that. I saw the original ruby slippers that Dorothy wears in The Wizard of Oz from 1939, and I was honestly blown away. I mean, they're just slippers, whatever, but it's just like, those are the slippers. Those are them from the movie. It was so crazy. I didn't expect it. It kind of took me off guard. Someday, maybe the Rings of Power will have a costume in the Smithsonian National Museum of History, blah, blah, blah. Won't that be great? All right. Thank you for watching.
The rings of power are flashing on the sea. The magic is angry and Sauron is obscene. Gilgalad is making fences of around in the dark. The orcs are lighting bonfires and spread making apart.